This is my true story. After giving my life to my family, I believed my children would be by my side in my final years. But instead, they betrayed me. They said I was too much work, and one morning they drove me to a nursing home, left me there, and never looked back. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, with no visits, no calls, no love. I thought my life would end in silence, until one stranger walked in carrying a folder that exposed the biggest secret my family had ever kept. Before I share what happened, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so that my story can reach more people. Betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it comes softly, dressed in fake smiles and gentle words. But the wound it leaves cuts deeper than anything sharp. My betrayal came from the very people I had given everything to. My children. For years, I worked myself to the bone for them. Long shifts, aching bones, missed meals, and sleepless nights. All so they could grow up without knowing the weight of poverty. I built their future with my bare hands, believing that one day, when I was old and weak, they would be the ones to carry me. That was the promise I made to myself when I became a father. But life does not always return what you give. Sometimes it takes everything and leaves you with nothing. When my health started failing, I noticed their visits became shorter. They no longer asked how I was feeling. Instead, they whispered to each other when they thought I couldn't hear. They used words like burden and too much work. They spoke of me as if I were not sitting right beside them, as if I were already gone. They told me it was for my health, that I needed professional care, but their eyes told the truth. They wanted me out of their lives. The laughter they once shared with me was gone. The warmth of their presence disappeared. What remained was impatience, annoyance, and a coldness that I never thought my own blood would show me. The day they abandoned me still burns in my memory. My daughter told me she was taking me for a checkup. I trusted her. I put on my best sweater, combed what little hair I had left, and even polished my shoes, because I thought maybe afterward we'd go for lunch like we used to. But instead, the car stopped in front of a building with pale walls and barred windows. She smiled weakly and told me it was just temporary. I stepped inside, confused, still believing her words. But when I turned around, she was gone. No hug, no goodbye, not even a glance back. She left me standing in the hallway with a nurse holding paperwork, as though I were a piece of luggage being checked in. The room they gave me was small and cold, a single bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. The walls were empty, the air smelled of disinfectant, and the silence was heavy. I sat on the bed and waited, believing my children would return to explain, to visit, to make it better. But days passed, and no one came. I realized then that I had not been placed there for my health. I had been discarded, like an old chair no one wanted to keep but couldn't bring themselves to throw away at the curb. The betrayal sank deeper each day. I thought of the sacrifices, the tuition I paid, the debts I cleared, the nights I went without food so they could eat. I thought of the home I built for them, brick by brick, with sweat dripping from my forehead under the hot sun. I thought of the love I gave freely, the guidance, the encouragement. And now, after a lifetime of giving, they left me to be cared for by strangers. My own flesh and blood, the people I had carried on my shoulders, had decided I was too heavy to carry on theirs. What made the betrayal worse was the lies they told themselves to feel better. They told relatives I was in the best place for my needs. They told neighbors it was for my safety. But in truth, it was for their convenience. They wanted freedom, not responsibility. They wanted laughter in their homes without the weight of my presence. And so, they left me behind, convincing themselves that abandonment was love. But I knew the difference. Love visits, love calls, love cares. What they gave me was not love. It was betrayal, plain and sharp. Every night I lay in that narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself how I had come to this. How had I, who gave everything, ended up with nothing? How could they forget so easily the man who built their future? I tried to forgive, but forgiveness requires remorse, and they had none. They did not see me as their father anymore. They saw me as weight to be carried, and when the load grew too heavy, they dropped me without hesitation. That was the betrayal of my life. Silence has a sound. It is not just the absence of voices. It is the echo of what is missing. In the nursing home, silence followed me everywhere. In the mornings, I woke to the clatter of trays and the shuffle of nurses' feet, but no familiar voice greeted me. At lunch, I sat in the dining hall surrounded by other residents, most of whom had families who came faithfully every Sunday, bringing flowers, hugs, and laughter. I watched as those children kissed their parents' cheeks, as grandchildren climbed into their laps, filling their hearts with warmth. And then I looked at my table, where the chair beside me stayed empty. The silence in that chair was louder than all the noise in the room. Birthdays came and went. I remember one in particular. The staff brought me a small cupcake with a single candle on top. They smiled kindly, but their eyes carried pity. They knew no one was coming. I closed my eyes and made a wish. Not for wealth, not for youth, but for a simple visit, a phone call, a sign that my family still remembered me. When I opened my eyes, the candle was still burning, but the emptiness around me told me my wish would not come true. That day ended like all the others, in silence. Holidays were the hardest. Christmas passed with decorations on the walls and carols on the speakers, but no family by my side. New Year's Eve came with cheers and clinking glasses in the halls, but my room stayed dark. On Easter, I watched a man across the hall surrounded by children carrying baskets of eggs, their laughter spilling into the corridor. I smiled at them, but the smile cracked when I returned to my bed. My own children did not even send a card. To them, I was gone already, erased from the calendar of their lives. Each Sunday, I sat by the window, hoping for the sound of footsteps that never came. I stared at the entrance, waiting for a familiar face to walk through the door. Every time the door opened, my heart leapt, but it was always for someone else. And when the door closed again, the silence pressed harder on my chest. Sundays stretched into weeks, weeks into months, until time itself became a blur of waiting and disappointment. At night, the silence grew heavier. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of machines, the distant coughs of other residents, the creak of doors closing. My mind replayed the past, the laughter of my children when they were small, the sound of their feet running across the floor, the way they once called me Papa with joy in their voices. Those memories echoed in the silence like ghosts, reminding me of what I had lost. I whispered their names in the dark, hoping the walls could carry my voice to them, but no one answered. The silence was not just outside me, it was inside too. I stopped speaking as much, stopped trying to start conversations with staff, stopped sharing stories with the few visitors who came for others. What was the point of speaking when no one truly listened? The silence taught me something cruel. That being forgotten feels worse than dying. Because when you die, you know it is final. But when you are forgotten, you live every day wondering why you are not enough to be remembered. I watched the seasons change from my window, leaves falling, snow covering the ground, flowers blooming again. But my room stayed the same. The silence stretched across every season, unbroken, unchanging. It became my only companion, wrapping itself around me like a cold blanket. I used to think I feared death, but I realized I feared this silence more. Death ends suffering. Silence makes it endless. That was my life in the nursing home. Days measured not by visits or voices, but by silence so loud it hollowed me out from the inside. Abandonment is heavier than any weight the body can carry. My bones ached from age, but it was the weight in my chest that nearly broke me. Each morning when I woke up in that small nursing home bed, I felt the emptiness pressing down on me. It was not just the loneliness of a quiet room. It was the crushing realization that my own children had erased me from their lives. I had become invisible to the very people whose lives I had built with my hands. That weight was worse than illness, worse than pain, worse than death itself. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and replayed my life in my mind. I remembered the days when my children were small, when their tiny hands clung to mine as I walked them to school. I remembered working 2 shifts back to back, my body screaming for rest, but my mind pushing forward because I wanted them to have more than I ever did. I remembered sitting at the dinner table with them, watching them eat the last portion while I told them I wasn't hungry, even though my stomach burned with emptiness. I remembered saving every coin, planning every expense, sacrificing every comfort, all so they would never know hunger, never know shame. And now, what did all of that mean? All of those memories, all of those sacrifices were erased with a single label: burden. That was what they called me behind closed doors, what they believed me to be. Not a father, not the man who raised them, not the one who held their world together when it could have fallen apart. Just a burden, a weight they no longer wanted to carry. The weight of abandonment is not just grief. It is humiliation. It is sitting in a dining hall surrounded by people whose families still care while your chair stays empty. It is seeing the pity in the eyes of the nurses when they realize no one comes for you. It is hearing the laughter of other residents' grandchildren in the halls while your name is never spoken. It is being alive, yet treated as though you are already gone. Every day I carried that weight silently. I tried to tell myself they were busy, that maybe tomorrow they would call, that maybe next week they would visit. But deep down, I knew the truth. They had abandoned me not because of time, but because of choice. They had chosen freedom over responsibility. They had chosen convenience over love. And that choice crushed me more than any illness ever could. I began to wonder if my life had meant anything at all. What was the point of all the years I spent working, sacrificing, giving everything, if in the end I was left alone in a place where no one spoke my name? I thought about my wife, now gone, and how she had once told me our children would take care of me when she could not. I clung to her words for years, but now they felt like broken promises. She had believed in them. I had believed in them. But we were both wrong. The weight of abandonment is cruel because it does not just sit on your shoulders. It seeps into your soul. It makes you question your worth, your purpose, your very existence. I felt like a shadow, a ghost haunting the halls of the nursing home. I was alive, but forgotten. Breathing, but erased. And every memory of my sacrifices became a heavier chain around my heart, because those memories reminded me of what I gave and what I received in return. That was the weight I carried. Not just the silence, but the abandonment that cut deeper than any knife. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that looked no different from the hundreds that came before it. The sun streamed weakly through the blinds in my room, dust floating in the air, the sound of distant television leaking in from the hallway. I sat in my chair by the window, staring at the garden outside where some residents' families had gathered. Children ran across the grass, balloons bobbing in the air, laughter filling the space with life. But none of that belonged to me. I sat as always, alone, forgotten, invisible. I thought the day would end like all the others, in silence. But then the knock came. At first I assumed it was just a nurse bringing medication, or perhaps a volunteer making rounds. The knock was gentle, almost hesitant, but there was something in it that made me pause. When I opened the door, I did not see the familiar uniform of staff or the pitying smile of a volunteer. Instead, there stood a man I had never seen before. He was middle-aged, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes steady but kind. He held a worn leather folder in his hands, the edges frayed as though it had been carried for years. He spoke softly, asking if I was who he thought I was. When I nodded, he stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He was not family, that much was clear. But he carried himself with a kind of purpose, as if he had come for a reason far greater than a casual visit. He introduced himself with a name that stirred something faint in my memory, a name tied to my past, though I could not place it immediately. He explained that he had once been connected to a man I had known many decades ago, back when I was still young, still fighting to build a future for my family. He said that in sorting through old records, something had surfaced, something that concerned me directly. That was why he had come. I stared at him in confusion. My heart raced, not from fear, but from curiosity. No one visited me. No one came for me. And yet here was a stranger standing in my room, holding a folder that seemed to weigh more than just paper. My voice trembled as I asked what it was about. He placed the folder gently on my table, like it was something sacred. Then he looked me in the eye and said, "This belongs to you." The room grew still. I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead light, the distant laughter outside, the sound of my own heart pounding. Slowly, with hands that shook more from emotion than age, I reached for the folder. The leather was warm, worn from time, but inside I could feel the weight of truth waiting. I opened it carefully, and as I flipped through the first few pages, my breath caught in my throat. These were not just papers. They were records, legal documents, proof of things I had long forgotten or perhaps thought lost forever. I looked up at him, my voice weak, asking why he had brought them to me. He said something that struck me deeply. "Because the truth deserves to be in your hands, not hidden in theirs." At that moment, I knew this was no ordinary visitor. This was the beginning of something I had never expected. A chance, a revelation, perhaps even justice. When I opened that worn folder, I expected maybe a letter, perhaps some forgotten memory from my youth. But what I found inside stole the air from my lungs. Page after page, document after document, each one carried weight far heavier than paper. At first, my eyes struggled to focus, my old hands trembling as I turned each sheet. But soon, the words and numbers began to sink in, and with every page, my world shifted. There were bank statements, some yellowed with age, others more recent. They bore my name, not forged, not mistaken, but mine. Accounts I had long forgotten, accounts I never knew had grown into something so vast. Investments I had made decades ago, small amounts I thought would vanish or mean nothing, had multiplied quietly over the years. The stranger explained that those accounts had been dormant but not erased, gathering interest, building value, waiting for someone to claim them. My children never told me about this. They acted as if I was penniless, as if I had nothing left to give. But here was proof that I still held more than they imagined. Then there were property deeds. My name appeared again and again, tied to lands I had once purchased in desperation, thinking they would help secure a better future for my family. I had nearly forgotten about them because I signed them over in trust, believing my children would handle them wisely. But the visitor pointed out something chilling. Those properties had been misused. My children had leveraged them, borrowing against them, making deals in my absence, and all the while, they told me I had nothing left. They lied. They pretended I was worthless while they quietly used what was mine to build their lives. The folder also contained contracts, old agreements I had once signed with a business partner, agreements I thought had dissolved when times grew hard. But tucked within those pages was proof that my share had remained intact, growing in value, hidden away, untouched but not forgotten. That partner had preserved my rights, and through the stranger, those rights had returned to me. My children never mentioned it. Instead, they had spread the story that I was broke, that I was dependent, that I was the burden they carried. Yet the truth lay in my hands now. I was never the burden. I was still the foundation, still the one holding more power than they wanted me to know. But the most shocking part was not the wealth or the properties. It was the evidence the visitor showed me about my children themselves. There were letters, receipts, records that revealed they had been hiding their own lies. They had taken loans in my name without my knowledge. They had manipulated accounts, pretending to pay bills when in reality they were draining what belonged to me. They told people I was penniless, yet they lived off money that had been mine all along. They crafted a story where I was helpless so they could justify throwing me away. And for years, I believed them. For years, I thought I had nothing left. But the documents in that folder told a different story. As I turned page after page, my heart pounded not just with shock, but with something I had not felt in years, power. These papers were not just words on a page. They were proof. Proof that I was not finished. Proof that my life, my sacrifices, my name still carried weight. Proof that the story my children told about me, that I was worthless, that I was nothing, was a lie. The truth was here, in my hands, undeniable and unshakable. The visitor leaned closer and said, "They built their comfort on your silence, but silence cannot bury the truth forever." I held the documents tightly, my fingers pressing into the paper as if to fuse them into my skin. For the first time since being abandoned in that nursing home, I felt the chains loosen. I was not the weak, forgotten man they painted me to be. I was still the man who built, who provided, who gave everything. And now, with this folder, I had the chance to take it all back. The secret documents were no longer secrets. They were my justice waiting to be claimed. The revelation did not hit me all at once. It came in waves, each stronger than the last, drowning me in truth I had not expected to face. For so long, I believed my children when they told me I had nothing. I believed them when they said my money was gone, my savings finished, my strength spent. I thought my only worth left in this world was as a father who could no longer provide. And that was why their words, "You're a burden," cut me so deeply. They convinced me I was powerless, and in that powerless state, they abandoned me. But the folder on my lap, the documents stacked high with signatures and stamps, destroyed that lie in an instant. I realized then what they had done. My children had betrayed me not only with abandonment, but with deception. They had told the world I was penniless so they could take my assets without question. They built their success on the lie that I was finished, that I was irrelevant. They spread this story to relatives, neighbors, anyone who asked why I was in a nursing home. "He has nothing left," they would say. "We did everything for him, but now he can't even take care of himself." And people believed them. People pitied them for having to carry me. But the truth was that they were feeding off my silence, hiding their theft behind the mask of being dutiful children. The papers revealed otherwise. I still owned more than they wanted me to know. The investments, the properties, the accounts, all of it tied to my name. I was not penniless. I was not helpless. I was still the foundation of the life they enjoyed. And as I stared at the pages, I felt anger rise in me, hot and sharp. But alongside it came something even stronger. Clarity. They abandoned me because they thought I had nothing left to give. They left me in this home to rot, thinking I would fade away quietly, never knowing the truth. They thought they had erased me. But what they did not know was that their lie had an expiration date, and it had arrived. The stranger who placed that folder in my hands had delivered more than papers. He had delivered my dignity back to me. He had returned the truth that my children tried to bury. The revelation was not just about money or assets. It was about identity. For years, they painted me as useless, someone whose story had ended. But these documents proved that my story was still alive, still tied to everything they valued. Their businesses, their homes, their comfort, all of it stood on the foundation of what I had built. Without me, without my sacrifices, they would have had nothing. And the cruelest part? They knew it. That was why they tried so hard to bury the truth. That was why they hid the documents, why they spread lies. Because deep down, they knew that without me, their empire would collapse. I sat there in my small nursing home room, the afternoon light casting long shadows on the floor, and I realized something powerful. I was not powerless. I was not finished. I was not the man they tried to erase. I still had control. I still had the ability to rewrite the story. And with that realization came a feeling I had not known in years: strength. The revelation burned away the despair that had settled in me since the day they left me here. I was no longer the abandoned old man staring at the ceiling, waiting to die in silence. I was the man holding the truth in his hands, the man who now had the chance to turn their betrayal into justice. My children thought they had the final word, but they were wrong. The truth had spoken louder than their lies, and it was in my possession now. The revelation was clear. I was not the burden. I was the backbone, and they were about to learn that truth in the hardest way possible. The turning point in my life did not come with fanfare or applause. It came quietly in that small nursing home room, with the hum of fluorescent lights above me and the folder of truth resting on my lap. For months, I had accepted my fate as if it were already sealed, abandoned, forgotten, left to wait for death. But now, holding those documents, I felt a shift inside me. It was like a flame, long buried in ashes, had been sparked back to life. For the first time in years, I felt control return to my hands. I stared at the folder for hours, reading and rereading every page. My eyes burned with fatigue, my hands trembled, but my mind grew sharper with each passing minute. These were not just papers. They were weapons. Weapons against the lies my children told, against the narrative that I was worthless. They had painted me as a burden to excuse their betrayal, but the truth showed I was still the foundation of everything they claimed as their own. That knowledge filled me with strength, and strength led to resolve. I decided then and there that I would not leave this world quietly. The first step was to call my lawyer. It had been years since I had last spoken to him, but his voice was steady, familiar, almost surprised to hear me again. I told him I needed to meet, that I had documents in my possession that changed everything. At first, he hesitated, asking if I was sure I wanted to take this on at my age, in my condition. But I told him firmly, I may be old, but I am not dead, and I am not finished. My voice cracked with age, but behind it was fire, and he understood. We arranged a meeting, and I knew in that moment that the power my children had stolen was returning to me piece by piece. The next step was to decide what to do with what I still owned. For years, my children assumed everything would fall into their laps when I was gone. They believed my silence meant surrender, that my absence meant erasure. But I was alive, and I had the chance to rewrite everything. I instructed my lawyer to transfer my assets into trusts that would bypass my children completely. I wanted my wealth, my properties, my investments, to go to causes that mattered, to charities that helped people like me, the forgotten, the abandoned, the ones society pushed aside. I wanted my sacrifices to mean something greater than the greed of ungrateful children. But I did not stop there. I made sure the trusts were ironclad, written with protections so strong that no one could challenge them, not even family. My lawyer drafted documents that sealed every loophole, every possible way my children might try to crawl back in. With every signature I placed on those papers, I felt a piece of my dignity return. They thought I was powerless, but here I was, signing away their inheritance, rewriting their future, proving that even from a nursing home, I still had the power to change their lives forever. The turning point was not just legal, it was emotional. For months, I had carried the weight of humiliation, the sting of abandonment, the ache of betrayal. Those feelings had almost destroyed me. But now, I turned that pain into fuel. I realized that my story did not have to end with despair. I could choose how it ended. I could turn their betrayal into my justice. Each day that followed, I felt stronger. I walked the halls of the nursing home differently. The staff noticed it too. They said I looked lighter, more alive, as if a burden had been lifted. And in a way, it had. The burden of silence was gone. The burden of helplessness was gone. The burden of being erased was gone. I was not erased. I was rewriting the story in ink that could not be washed away. The turning point was simple but powerful. I realized that my children no longer held power over me. They abandoned me thinking I was worthless. But the truth was, I still held the strings to their lives, and I had just cut them free. Fallout has a sound, and I will never forget it. It is the sound of hurried footsteps in the nursing home hallway, the sound of my children's voices calling my name after months of silence, the sound of their chairs scraping the floor as they rushed to sit near me, not out of love, but out of panic. Word had spread. Somehow, they learned the truth. They learned I was not penniless, not powerless, not erased. They learned that the man they abandoned still controlled more than they ever imagined. The fallout began the moment their lie cracked open, and the truth spilled out into the world. They came into my room with forced smiles, carrying flowers and fruit baskets, as though these shallow gestures could erase the months I spent in loneliness. My daughter kissed my cheek awkwardly, the same cheek she once turned away from when I begged her for attention. My son sat close, gripping my hand, the same hand he had let go of when he left me here like an unwanted object. Their words tumbled over each other. "We missed you, Father. We're sorry we haven't been here more often. We've been so busy, but we love you." Each sentence was a lie, and I knew it. They did not come because they missed me. They did not come because they loved me. They came because they were afraid that the truth had cut them out, afraid that the inheritance they thought belonged to them had slipped through their greedy fingers. Their voices were sweet, but their eyes betrayed them. Their eyes darted toward the folder on my table, toward the documents that exposed everything. They could not hide their fear. I listened in silence, letting them speak, letting them wrap themselves in excuses. They spoke of how hard life had been for them, how they meant well, how the nursing home was for my health. They tried to rewrite the past with honeyed words, as if I would forget the long nights of loneliness, the empty chair by my bed, the silence of birthdays and holidays. They thought a few apologies, a few flowers, a few soft touches could erase the truth. But they were too late. The fallout spread beyond this room. Relatives began calling, some in shock, others in anger. They had been told for months that I was penniless, that I was dependent, that I was living here because I had nothing left. But now the truth was out. They learned I still had wealth, property, and investments. They learned that my children had lied, not just to me, but to everyone. Their image of being dutiful children shattered overnight. The community that once pitied them now looked at them with suspicion. The lie that had protected their reputation was gone, replaced by the truth of their greed. In my room, their panic grew louder. My daughter's voice cracked as she begged me to reconsider, to come home with her, to let her take care of me. My son promised he would handle everything, that I did not need to worry about a thing. They spoke as if they wanted to repair the bond, but every word carried the stench of desperation. They did not want me. They wanted what I had. They wanted to control the truth again, to bury the revelation before it destroyed them completely. But I had already made my choice. The documents had been signed, the trusts had been created, the protections sealed. Their pleas were useless. They had abandoned me when they believed I had nothing. And now that they knew I had everything, they came crawling back. That was the fallout, the crumbling of their pride, the collapse of their lies, the exposure of their greed. I sat in my chair, calm, silent, watching them unravel. For months, I had been the one in pain, the one erased, the one forgotten. Now the tables had turned. The weight of truth pressed on them, and they could not escape it. The fallout was theirs to carry now, not mine. The day of the final confrontation came sooner than I expected. My children returned again, but this time there was no fruit basket, no flowers, no forced sweetness in their voices. Their faces were hard, their eyes restless, their words rushed. They had heard from the lawyer. They knew I had already signed away what they once believed was theirs. The fake smiles had fallen, and what stood before me now was the truth of who they were. Not children filled with love, but adults consumed by greed. They sat across from me in the small nursing home room, the same room where I had cried in silence for months. The same room where I had believed my life was over. But now, the balance of power had shifted. They fidgeted nervously, their voices sharp, their excuses more desperate than ever. My daughter spoke first, her tone firm, but trembling underneath. "Father, you don't understand what you've done. You're confused, you're old, you're being taken advantage of. That money, those properties, they're ours by right. We carried you. We took care of you." Her words stung, but they did not wound me anymore. I looked at her, calm and steady, and thought of the long months I spent alone in that bed while she laughed in her own home, telling others I was penniless. I thought of the times I begged for a visit, and she turned her back. I thought of the day she left me here, without a hug or even a glance. And now she sat in front of me, claiming she carried me. The hypocrisy made my chest burn, but I remained silent. I let her speak until her lies crumbled under their own weight. My son leaned forward, his face red with anger. "You owe us," he said, his voice loud in the quiet room. "Do you think you built this alone? Do you think your sacrifices mean anything without us? Everything you have, everything you did, it was for us. That makes it ours." His words revealed more than he realized. To him, love was ownership, sacrifice was obligation, and my life's work was nothing but a resource to be consumed. I let them finish, their voices colliding in the room, their accusations bouncing off the walls. And then, when the silence finally came, I spoke. My voice was soft, but each word carried the weight of years of pain. "You abandoned me when you thought I had nothing. You left me here to die alone. Not once did you call. Not once did you visit. You told the world I was worthless. And now, because you see the truth, because you see I am not finished, you come crawling back." They tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand, and for the first time in years, they stopped talking. I looked each of them in the eye, not with anger, but with clarity. "You did not carry me. I carried you. Every degree you earned, every house you bought, every meal you ate, it was because of me. I sold my jewelry, I skipped meals, I worked until my bones ached, all so you could rise. And when I became weak, when I needed even a fraction of that love returned, you turned your backs." The room was silent. Their faces were pale, their eyes darting away, unable to hold mine. I leaned back in my chair and continued. "You abandoned me because you believed I had nothing left. And now you know the truth. I still control everything. But it no longer belongs to you. You showed me your hearts, and they are filled with greed, not love, and I will not reward greed." My daughter's lips trembled. She whispered, "Father, please, we can change." But I shook my head slowly. Number change is not born from desperation. Change is born from love, and love is what you never gave me. That was the final confrontation. I did not shout. I did not curse. I did not throw their betrayal back at them with rage. I simply spoke the truth, and the truth was heavier than any anger could ever be. They left my room that day broken, their empire of lies shattered, their future rewritten. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Justice did not come to me in the way I once imagined it would. I thought perhaps it would be loud, that it would arrive with anger, with shouting, with punishment for what they had done. But in truth, justice came quietly, in the same way my sacrifices had once been quiet. It came not with noise, but with peace. The day I signed those final documents with my lawyer, securing my assets in trusts and charities, I felt a calmness wash over me. For decades I had given without recognition, endured without thanks, and loved without limits. Now, for the first time, I gave to those who would not betray me. That was justice. The nursing home no longer felt like a prison after that. It became a place where I could breathe, where I could live without the constant ache of humiliation. The staff treated me with kindness, not because of my wealth, but because they saw me as human. They cared for me in the way my own blood never did. And when they learned, quietly, that I had secured their future with part of my inheritance, their eyes filled with gratitude, not greed. It was then I realized something. Family is not always bound by blood. Family is found in the ones who stand by you when the rest of the world walks away. My children stopped visiting after the confrontation. Perhaps they were too ashamed, perhaps they were too angry. Or perhaps they realized there was nothing left for them to take. Whatever the reason, their absence no longer hurt me. I had carried the weight of abandonment for too long. But now, with truth on my side and justice secured, I laid that weight down. Their absence became freedom. Their silence became peace. In my final years, I found a different kind of companionship. The stranger who brought me the folder visited often. We spoke of the past, of the man who had once been my partner, of the life I thought I had lost. He reminded me that even in the darkest corners of betrayal, light can still find its way in. Through him, I remembered that my story was not just about abandonment, it was also about redemption. He returned to me not just documents, but dignity, not just wealth, but worth. Justice was not about making my children suffer. Justice was about making sure their betrayal did not define me. They wanted my ending to be one of silence, of invisibility, of weakness. Instead, my ending became one of strength, of clarity, of control. They thought they erased me, but I proved that I was still the author of my own story. And when the day finally comes when I leave this world, I know my legacy will not be in the hands of those who abandoned me. It will live in the charities that feed the hungry, in the shelters that protect the weak, in the scholarships that lift young people who still believe in sacrifice and love. That is where my wealth will go. That is where my justice will live. As I sit in my chair now, the sun streaming through the window, I feel no bitterness. I feel peace. Because in the end, I won. Not by destroying them, but by refusing to let their betrayal destroy me. I was abandoned in a nursing home, but I was not abandoned by life. Life gave me a stranger with a folder. Life gave me truth, and life gave me justice. My final thought. They left me in a nursing home to die. Instead, I lived long enough to watch their empire crumble.